The gravel crunched under the tires of the hired car, a sound that always felt like an overture to the grim symphony of my work. Sunlight, thin and pale through the autumn leaves, dappled the winding drive leading to Blackwood Manor. It was a place steeped in history, a sprawling stone edifice that had witnessed centuries of English life. Now the backdrop for a death that the local authorities were all too eager to label a tragic accident. They wanted it simple, clean. My job was rarely simple and seldom clean. I was Seth, a forensic anthropologist, and my expertise lay in the stories bones could tell, the whispers left behind on fractured femurs or eroded vertebrae. I saw time in a different way than most, not as a linear progression, but as a series of layers, each capable of concealing or revealing truth. When the call came about the Professor Finch, a celebrated historian whose sudden demise had sent ripples through academic circles, I knew it wouldn't be straightforward. Finch was too careful, too meticulous in his life and work, to simply tumble down a flight of outdoor steps at his own historically significant estate. The car pulled up to a temporary barrier, a single strip of yellow tape flapping lazily in the breeze. A uniformed officer, younger than me by at least a decade, nodded curtly and waved me through. The lead detective, a man with tired eyes and a perpetually creased brow, met me at the base of the manor's grand, ivy-choked exterior staircase. Seth, the detective acknowledged, his voice a low rumble. "Thanks for coming out so quickly." As I said over the phone, "It looks like a clear-cut case. Tragic, of course, but an accident." I didn't respond directly, my gaze already sweeping the scene. Blackwood Manor loomed, its ancient stones exuding a sense of forgotten narratives. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. The steps where Finch had reportedly fallen were wide, worn smooth by generations of footsteps, leading down to a flagstone patio. A few police personnel moved with practiced efficiency, but their movements lacked the sharp focus I sought. They were processing, not truly investigating, an accident scene. "Tell me what you have," I requested, my voice calm, betraying none of the initial prickle of intuition that was already working its way through my thoughts. Body was discovered at 0700 by an estate worker on his morning rounds, the detective explained, gesturing towards the covered remains. "Dr. Finch was found at the bottom of these steps. Appears he lost his footing, tumbled down. Head injury, fatal. The grounds are damp from last night's rain, so it's plausible. No signs of struggle, no forced entry anywhere in the manor. His study was locked from the inside, as was his bedroom." I walked toward the covered form, my boots making little sound on the wet flagstones. The plastic sheeting, opaque and sterile, offered a stark contrast to the organic decay around us. My eyes, however, were fixed on a body. They were tracing the path of the supposed fall, examining the lichen-flecked stone, the scattered leaves, the disturbed soil at the base of the steps. The ground had indeed been wet, but the disturbance felt too neat. The trajectory of a genuine, uncontrolled fall often left a wider, more chaotic spread. Here, it was almost contained, as if Finch had rolled, not tumbled. "Any witnesses?" I asked, kneeling beside the body, careful not to disturb anything outside the immediate perimeter. Dr. Finch lived alone, apart from the groundskeepers and a handful of other staff who keep the place running. They live in cottages on the estate, some distance away. Nobody heard anything. I pulled on my gloves, the latex a faint whisper against my skin. With a nod to the attending officer, I carefully lifted the sheet. The Professor Finch lay on his back, eyes open and staring blankly at the overcast sky. His silver hair, usually meticulously combed, was matted with blood and dirt. The impact had clearly been severe, a depressed fracture visible on his temple. But it was the rest of him that caught my attention. His hands, though slightly abraded, were not clenched. There were no defensive wounds, no desperate scrapes from trying to break a fall. More importantly, his clothes, a tweed jacket and trousers, were rumpled, but not torn or snagged in a way that suggested a violent, uncontrolled descent. I leaned closer, my gaze moving methodically over his person. His spectacles, though askew, were intact, resting on his nose. A small, anachronistic detail. A fall of this magnitude, one causing a fatal head injury, should have sent them flying. I gently touched the bridge of the frames. They felt firm, not loose. "Did anyone move anything before my arrival?" I asked, my voice flat. "No, sir," the officer replied promptly. "Scene was secured immediately after discovery." I hummed a low, non-committal sound. My eyes scanned the area around Finch's head, but amidst the leaves and damp earth, something glinted. A tiny, almost microscopic shard of metal, no bigger than a grain of rice, caught the light. It wasn't organic, nor did it look like anything from the manor's architecture or Finch's attire. I carefully retrieved it with tweezers, placing it in a small evidence bag. "What's that?" the detective asked, finally showing a flicker of curiosity. "Couldn't say yet," I replied, sealing the bag. "Just an outlier." My focus returned to the steps. I climbed them slowly, examining each riser and tread. There were scuff marks consistent with the fall, but they didn't quite align with the severity of Finch's injuries. A genuine tumble down these many steps should have left more damage to the stone, more widespread scraping. At the top, near the ornate iron railing, I paused. The railing itself was solid, well maintained. No loose sections, no obvious point of failure. I descended again, my eyes now searching the ground beneath the steps where foliage grew thick. A few discarded leaves, some small twigs, then half buried in the damp earth, barely visible beneath a cluster of ivy, I saw it. A fragment of paper, no larger than my thumbnail, water damaged and partially obscured. Only a few words were legible, printed in a precise, almost clinical font. My gloved fingers carefully brushed away the soil. The paper was stiff, almost waxy. I could make out "Shore Law Office," and below it, "Shred Bins, Locked Safes." My internal gears shifted. An offshore law office with shred bins and locked safes. Not the sort of detail one expected to find at the scene of a simple, tragic fall at a venerable English estate. It was a phrase that conjured images of hidden assets, clandestine dealings, and things people desperately wanted to keep buried. This was not just an outlier. It was a flag, bold and red, waving against the backdrop of an otherwise meticulously arranged tableau. I carefully photographed the fragment in situ, then bagged it. "Detective," I said, rising to my feet, the paper evidence clutched in my hand. "I need to examine Dr. Finch's study, and I'd like a full inventory of his recent correspondences and financial records if possible." The detective frowned, his brow furrowing deeper. "Seth, we've already been through his study. Everything was in order. Nothing suggested anything other than academic research." "Perhaps," I conceded, my gaze sweeping the manor once more, now seeing it not as a historical monument, but as a stage for something far more sinister. "But I have a feeling Dr. Finch wasn't just researching history. He might have been trying to protect it or expose something hidden within it." I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that this was not an accident. This was a story waiting to be meticulously unearthed, bone by bone, fragment by fragment. The crisp autumn air, which had felt refreshing moments ago, now carried a distinct chill. The silence of Blackwood Manor no longer felt peaceful. It felt watchful, pregnant with unvoiced secrets. This was a story, and I was just beginning to read its opening lines. I knelt beside the historian's remains, the sterile blue of my gloves a stark contrast to the rich, earthy tones of the manor's grounds. The lead investigator, a burly man with a perpetually furrowed brow, stood a respectful distance back, his arms crossed over a worn tweed jacket. He watched me with the patient skepticism of someone who had seen countless accidents and few genuine mysteries. I ignored him, my focus absolute. "Doctor, the fall from the narrow, ornate balcony above was estimated to be just over 20 feet. A tragic accident, the local constabulary had concluded, a misstep in the dim pre-dawn light. But my eyes, trained to see beyond the obvious, already registered discrepancies. I began my meticulous examination, a ritual of observation and documentation. Each movement was deliberate, each photograph carefully framed. I started with the macroscopic, assessing the overall position of the body, the impact points on the flagstones, the disturbed foliage near the oak's base. Then I narrowed my gaze, moving closer to the historian himself. His spectacles were askew, one lens cracked, but still perched on his nose. A minor detail, perhaps, but odd for a fall of such magnitude. I started with the skull, where the most obvious trauma was visible. A compound fracture, consistent with a hard impact. But as I worked my way down the cervical spine, I felt something subtle, a mid-crunch that wasn't quite right. I leaned in, adjusting the beam of my pen light. The neck, while clearly broken, presented a peculiar pattern of stress. I carefully palpated the clavicles, then the ribs. They were fine, almost imperceptible, but undeniably present. These weren't simple compression fractures from landing. These were different. They suggested a force applied before the fall, or perhaps a different kind of impact. One that pushed inward rather than crushed from above or below. A direct, localized pressure. My brow furrowed deeper than the investigators. A 20-foot fall, even onto hard flagstone, typically resulted in widespread, often comminuted fractures, especially in the long bones and spine. These tiny, almost isolated breaks spoke of something more specific, more targeted. They were anachronistic with the reported trajectory, a discordant note in the symphony of gravity's violence. My gaze drifted to the historian's clothing. He was dressed in a tweed jacket, a heavy wool vest, and corduroy trousers, attire suitable for the cool autumn evening. I ran a sterile brush over the fabric, collecting samples. It was then, in the folds of his jacket sleeve, near the cuff, that I saw it. A faint, almost iridescent shimmer. It wasn't pollen, nor dust from the manor's ancient stone. Under the intense beam of my light, the particles sparkled with a subtle, almost crystalline quality. I retrieved a sterile microspatula and carefully scraped a tiny amount into a collection vial. "Anything, Seth?" The investigator's voice gravelly cut through my concentration. I straightened up, turning to face him, my expression unreadable. "I'm finding some inconsistencies, investigator. Nothing definitive yet, but enough to warrant a more thorough examination back at the facility." I held up the vial, its contents barely visible to the naked eye. "And this unusual trace evidence doesn't quite fit the local geology," he grunted, unconvinced. "Man lived here for decades. Could be anything from his studies. Ancient dust from old books, perhaps." "Perhaps," I conceded, though my gut screamed otherwise. Finch was a historian of the manor, true, but this dust felt alien. It possessed a unique mineral quality, a subtle hue that suggested a geological origin entirely foreign to Blackwood Manor or its immediate, verdant surroundings. It wasn't the dull gray of granite, or the reddish brown of local iron-rich soil. He knew my reputation. He knew I didn't chase phantoms. I sealed the vial, adding it to my growing collection of evidence bags. The microscopic bone fractures, the peculiar mineral dust. They were threads, delicate but strong, weaving a narrative that contradicted the simple tragedy of a fall. This wasn't an accident. This was an unraveling, and I had only just pulled the first knot. My work here was done for now, but the true investigation had only just begun. It wasn't the kind of particulate matter one collected simply by walking through ancient halls, no matter how neglected. This dust, clinging to Finch's clothes and more disturbingly, embedded in the abrasions on his hands, told a different story. I scooped a minute sample from Finch's cuff, then another from a small, almost invisible streak on the manor's grand staircase balustrade, where he might have brushed against it during his fall. My small field kit, always at the ready, contained vials and slides designed for exactly this kind of microscopic trespass. Back at my temporary workspace, a converted study in the manor's east wing, I placed a sliver under the high-powered lens. The crystalline structure, the way it caught the light, confirmed my initial suspicion. This was no ordinary dust. I drove the samples to a contact I trusted implicitly, an independent geological analyst whose workshop was tucked away in an industrial park on the outskirts of the city. The place smelled of ozone and powdered rock, a comforting aroma to me. "Seth, what marvel have you unearthed this time?" The analyst, a woman with perpetually stained hands and a keen eye, greeted me without looking up from his microscope. I handed her the sealed vials. "Something unique, I think. Find me its geological signature if you can. I'm particularly interested in anything that screams not from around here." She nodded, already preparing her own slides. "Give me an hour. Go grab a coffee, or perhaps annoy a local bureaucrat." I chose the latter, making calls to the county records office, pushing for any recent land transactions or permits related to archaeological surveys, particularly those that might have involved Finch. The stonewalling was predictable, a bureaucratic hum that only sharpened my resolve. An hour later, I returned to the workshop. "Well," I asked, leaning over her shoulder as she peered into the eyepiece. She straightened, pushing her spectacles up her nose. "It's a specific kind of feldspar, Seth. Unique trace elements. Highly unusual for this region. The closest geological match I can find is a formation roughly 80 miles northeast of here, deep in the old mining country. Remote, mostly abandoned. It's known for a very specific type of slate and, more recently, some minor, unlisted mineral deposits." "Why do you ask?" 80 miles northeast. Finch, a man obsessed with the manor's immediate history, wouldn't have reason to be there, not officially. "Unless thank you," I said, already turning to leave. "You've just given me a new direction." The drive was long, the paved roads giving way to gravel, then to little more than overgrown tracks. The GPS on my phone struggled, the signal fading in and out. The landscape grew wilder, dense with ancient, gnarled trees and rocky outcrops. When I finally reached the coordinates provided by the analyst, I found not a declared site, but a clearing hidden behind a curtain of pines. It was an unsanctioned archaeological dig site. My eyes swept over the scene, absorbing every detail. A makeshift canvas tarp, faded and torn, covered a shallow trench. Shovels, pickaxes, and brushes lay scattered, some still flecked with damp earth. A portable generator, now silent, sat beside a stack of empty fuel cans. This wasn't a casual amateur's weekend project. This was serious, prolonged work. I walked the perimeter, my boots crunching on loose shale. Near the trench, half buried under a fallen branch, I found a leather-bound journal. Finch's distinctive, precise handwriting filled the pages, interspersed with sketches of rock formations and cryptic symbols. The last entry, dated only 2 days before his death, read, The anomaly grows clearer. The coordinates lead to the heart of it. This isn't just about the Blackwood lineage. It's about what they protected. The artifact is here. The others suspect it. I'm close. The phrase resonated with a chilling implication. Further searching yielded a small, waterproof case. Inside, among geological survey maps and a compass, was a handwritten note with a local address. Elias Thorne, research assistant. The address was back in the nearest small town, a place I'd passed through only an hour ago. Finch had a research assistant? Why hadn't anyone mentioned him? The research assistant's small, unkempt cottage was nestled at the edge of town, its windows dark. I knocked, then knocked again, harder. After a long moment, the door creaked open a few inches. A young man, pale and gaunt, with nervous eyes, peered out. His hands trembled slightly as he clutched the doorframe. Elias Thorne? I asked, keeping my voice level, non-threatening. He swallowed hard. Who's asking? My name is Seth. I'm investigating Dr. Finch's death. His eyes darted left, then right, as if searching for an escape. I don't know anything about that. I found Finch's journal at a dig site up in the old mining country. I pressed gently. He mentioned you. He mentioned an anomaly and an artifact. The mention of the dig site, of the journal, seemed to deflate him. He opened the door wider, stepping back into the dim interior. The air inside was stale, heavy with the scent of unwashed clothes and instant coffee. Books were stacked everywhere, precarious towers reaching for the low ceiling. For months, it started subtly, then consumed him. He was convinced there was something hidden, something ancient, connected to the manor's earliest founders. He called it the lost artifact. And the dig site? I prompted. Elias wrung his hands. He swore me to secrecy, said it was too sensitive, too dangerous. He found a reference in some obscure Blackwood family ledger, a clue to a location far from the manor itself. He believed the family moved it, hid it, centuries ago. The dust he was bringing back samples for analysis, trying to pinpoint the exact strata. He mentioned the others in his journal. I stated, watching his reaction closely. His eyes widened, and he took another nervous step back. They started showing up about 6 weeks ago. Hushed meetings, always late at night, never at the manor, always different locations. They were formidable. Finch would come back from those meetings agitated, sometimes furious, sometimes terrified. What did they want? I asked. Elias shook his head vehemently. I don't know. He never told me specifics, only that they were interested in his progress, and that they had their own agenda regarding the artifact. He started locking his office, encrypting his files. He was afraid. Seth, genuinely afraid. He said they wanted the artifact for themselves to control its power, its legacy. Finch's fall, the strange dust, the unsanctioned dig, and now these enigmatic figures. The tension in the small room was palpable, a heavy cloak settling around us. Elias Thorne was clearly terrified, and his fear was infectious. I had stumbled into something far deeper than I could have imagined. The cold knot in my stomach had only tightened since I'd left the estate. Finch's fall, the strange dust, the unsanctioned dig, and those enigmatic figures lurking in the shadows. It wasn't a tragic accident. I needed to see the dig site for myself, to put my hands on the earth that had yielded such a dangerous secret. The drive out to the edge of the estate was a tense affair, the gravel crunching under my tires like a warning. I stepped out, my boots sinking slightly into the soft ground. The site was crude, not the meticulous grid of a professional archaeological dig. Piles of fresh earth were haphazardly mounded, and the edges of the trench were ragged, testifying to haste and disregard for proper procedure. My gaze swept over the scene, cataloging every detail. There were fresh tire tracks, distinct from the estate vehicles leading away from the site. Near a freshly exposed section of the trench, I spotted a glint. Kneeling, I brushed away loose soil, revealing a small, curved fragment. It was pottery, undeniably ancient, but unlike anything I'd expect from this region's known historical periods. The clay was finer, the glaze a deep, almost iridescent black, decorated with geometric patterns that felt alien, not just anachronistic. This wasn't local, it was from somewhere else entirely, a place whose history didn't intersect with this estate. This small shard screened illicit activity, confirming the clandestine nature of the digging. This was the missing piece, the material evidence connecting Finch's death to something deeper, older, and far more valuable than local history. A local law enforcement vehicle pulled it up, kicking up a plume of dust. The lead officer, a burly man whose expression was set in a permanent scowl, stepped out. "Still here, Seth?" the officer asked, his voice flat, devoid of genuine inquiry. "Thought you'd be done wrapping things up by now. Commander wants this case closed." Tragic fall, clear as day. I straightened, the pottery shard secure in my evidence kit. "There are irregularities, officer. Signs of recent, unauthorized excavation. A bit of old pot happens all the time on these old estates. Diggers find things, move things. The commander's been very clear. We're not wasting resources on ghost stories. Wrap it up. We'll be securing the site until then. Make sure nothing else complicates things." The patterns bookend rhythm in the air. They weren't securing the site to preserve evidence. They were securing it to ensure I found nothing more. Their resistance only fueled my determination. The pressure on them was palpable, a clear indication that someone powerful wanted this buried. I nodded slowly, maintaining eye contact. Understood. I'll ensure my report reflects everything I've found. I gave them no quarter, no indication that their thinly veiled intimidation would deter me. Leaving the dig site, my mind raced, piecing together the fragmented clues. Finch's research into forgotten lattices, the anachronistic pottery, the immediate cover-up by local authorities. This wasn't just about artifacts. It was about the power and wealth these artifacts represented and the people willing to kill to control them. Illicit trade often had a paper trail, legal fronts, shell corporations. My thoughts drifted to the intricate web of offshore finances and legal maneuvers often used to legitimize ill-gotten gains. I drove toward the nearest town, then veered off the main road, following a hunch, a name I'd vaguely remembered from Finch's scattered notes, a legal entity associated with the estate's historical transactions. I parked a discreet distance away, observing. Through the large, ground-floor windows, I could discern the faint outlines of industrial-sized shred bins, their paper capacities far exceeding what a typical office would need. A glint of polished steel hinted at a large safe built into the wall of an interior office. As I watched, a figure moved within, silhouetted against the light. They weren't working late. They were cleaning. Documents were being fed into the shredders, a constant low hum that was barely audible from my car. This wasn't just a law office, it was a sanctuary for secrets now being systematically purged. This was the reveal I needed. A legal apparatus actively complicit in the cover-up, meticulously destroying evidence. A fresh wave of tension washed over me. I had seen enough. The implications were clear. Someone was scrubbing the record, and the timing wasn't coincidental. I had disturbed their operation. As I pushed open the heavy door, a subtle shift in the air, a faint scent of disturbed dust, immediately put me on alert. Nothing seemed overtly out of place. My microscope was where I'd left it, the evidence locker still secured. But then I saw it. The small, decorative jar of pens on my desk had been subtly rearranged, a single pen lying at an odd angle, and a fine layer of dust I meticulously maintained on the edge of my desk, a crude but effective indicator of intrusion, was smudged. My gut tightened. Someone had been here. They hadn't taken anything valuable, hadn't smashed equipment. They had simply walked through, touched a few innocuous items, and left. They knew I was closing in. They knew where I worked, and they wanted me to understand the consequences of my continued investigation. The game had just escalated. A bit of old pot happens all the time on these old estates. Diggers find things, move things. His younger partner shifted, clearly uncomfortable with the brusque dismissal, but remained silent. I held the fragment tighter, the gritty texture a silent rebuttal to his casual indifference. He saw a shard of ceramic. I saw a puzzle piece, out of place, screaming for attention. Perhaps, I conceded, letting my voice remain even, but I'd still like to examine it more closely. Standard procedure, you understand. Anything found near a scene of death merits a look. I didn't wait for his permission, simply turning and heading towards the temporary lab I'd set up in one of the estate's lesser-used parlors. I'd learned long ago that sometimes, the most significant evidence lay in what others overlooked. Back in my makeshift workspace, the quiet hum of my portable microscope was a welcome sound after the officer's skepticism. I carefully placed the ceramic fragment under the lens. Its surface, a dull ochre, was adorned with faint geometric patterns, almost entirely worn away by time and handling. At first glance, it appeared genuinely ancient, consistent with artifacts found in this region, perhaps dating back to the Bronze Age. The shape suggested part of a vessel, likely a storage jar. But as I adjusted the magnification, my breath hitched. My fingers, accustomed to distinguishing millennia of wear from recent damage, traced the microfractures along the rim. They were too clean, too sharp, lacking the organic, weather degradation I expected. Then there was the composition. I scraped a minuscule sample onto a slide, added a drop of reagent, and observed the faint fizzing reaction. Clay from this specific region, from the genuine Bronze Age, possessed a unique mineral signature, almost a fingerprint. This fragment, however, contained trace elements of feldspar and quartz in proportions that didn't align with local deposits. Not only that, but the firing temperature, indicated by the vitrification level, was inconsistent with ancient kiln technology. It was too uniform, too high. This wasn't just an old pot. This was a lie, an incredibly sophisticated forgery, designed to mimic the pottery of the forgotten civilization of the Sunken Peaks, an obscure culture whose existence was still debated by mainstream archaeologists. The aesthetic was perfect, the stylistic elements meticulously copied, but the underlying science screamed fabrication. Someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to create this piece, not to deceive a casual collector, but to fool an expert. My understanding of Finch's death fractured and reformed. He wasn't just researching ancient artifacts. He was likely exposing a high-stakes forgery ring. Finch, a meticulous historian with an almost obsessive dedication to authenticity, would have been uniquely positioned to uncover such a deception. And if he had, he would have been a very dangerous man to certain individuals. The fall down the stairs suddenly felt less like an accident and more like a carefully orchestrated silence. A cold certainty settled in my gut. If Finch was onto something this big, he wouldn't have kept all his findings in plain sight. He would have hidden them. My gaze fell on the heavy oak door of Finch's study, the room I had initially dismissed as thoroughly searched by the local authorities. They would have looked for obvious files, journals. I returned to the study, the scent of aged paper and pipe tobacco still lingering. I moved with a different purpose now, my eyes scanning not for evidence of a fall, but for anomalies, for slight imperfections in the otherwise perfect order. I ran my hands along the spines of books, tested the weight of statuettes, tapped on the rich mahogany panels of the built-in bookshelves. Finch was a scholar of the past, a man who understood the art of concealment. My fingers brushed against a section of shelving dedicated to obscure cartography, ancient maps, nautical charts, astrological diagrams. One particular volume, a heavy leather-bound atlas, felt unusually thick. I pulled it out. The binding was tight, almost too tight. As I ran my thumb along the spine, I felt a faint, almost imperceptible seam on the back panel of the shelf itself. It wasn't a crack in the wood. It was a hairline joint. I pressed harder, then tried a gentle twist on the atlas in my hand. Nothing. I tried again, pressing firmly on the seam with my thumb while simultaneously pushing the atlas back into its slot. A soft click echoed in the quiet room. Inside, nestled in the velvet-lined recess, were two items. The first was a slim, military-grade data drive, its surface a dull matte black, clearly encrypted. The second was a sheet of parchment, brittle with age, covered in what appeared to be a complex array of symbols, geometric shapes, and fragmented Latin phrases. It was a map, but unlike any I'd ever seen. Finch hadn't just stumbled upon a forgery ring. This wasn't a simple case of a historian's tragic end. This was a conspiracy, and I had just found its heart. The truth of Finch's discovery settled over me like a shroud, chilling me to the bone. This wasn't merely about forged relics or a historian's unfortunate tumble. This was a meticulously woven tapestry of deceit, stretching back through generations, its threads spun from untold wealth and carefully guarded secrets. I needed a sanctuary, a place where the shadows couldn't reach, where the digital ghosts of Finch's life could speak freely, unobserved. My contact, a former intelligence analyst I'd occasionally consulted for sensitive data recovery, had arranged it. He'd been terse, his voice laced with an unusual urgency, simply directing me to a specific address with a single, encrypted access code. The building itself was a brutalist block of gray concrete and smoked glass, designed to repel rather than invite. My fingers, steady despite the tremor in my gut, punched in the sequence. Two industrial-sized shred bins, their mouths gaping, stood like silent sentinels in one corner. This was a place built for secrets to die, or, in my case, to be reborn. I wasted no time. My laptop, a portable scanner, and a suite of forensic software were laid out on the desk. The air was cool, smelling faintly of ozone and stale paper. Finch's encrypted drives, recovered from the hidden compartment in his study, were my first target. They pulsed with a silent potential, a digital Pandora's box. Finch had been meticulous, but also arrogant in his confidence. He'd used a layered encryption, a blend of historical ciphers and modern algorithms, believing his obscure knowledge would keep his findings safe. He hadn't accounted for a forensic anthropologist who occasionally moonlighted in cryptographic archaeology. Hours bled into a seamless stream of focused effort. My fingers danced across the keyboard, running scripts, testing hypotheses, sifting through digital noise for patterns. The initial attempts were met with stubborn resistance. Finch had employed a variation of a Vigenère cipher, its key likely embedded in some obscure historical text he revered. I remembered his fondness for Renaissance-era cartography and esoteric philosophical treatises. I fed my system a library of his published works, cross-referencing linguistic patterns, unusual word choices, even the precise spacing of his footnotes. A flicker, a partial match, a phrase from a forgotten 16th century treatise on celestial navigation. The key, broken into fragments, began to assemble itself. The first layer peeled back, then the second. The tension in my shoulders eased infinitesimally as lines of text, previously gibberish, resolved into coherent English. The files were a sprawling, disorganized digital archive. Scanned documents, old letters, photographs of artifacts, financial ledgers, and Finch's own research notes. He hadn't just collected data, he'd been building a case. Among the first documents I fully decrypted was a fragmented map, not a geographical map in the conventional sense, but a schematic of interconnected locations, marked with symbols I vaguely recognized from obscure heraldry and ancient societies. It wasn't about physical distance, but influence. Then came the names, a dizzying array of them, all prominent, all wealthy, all connected by a common thread of historical patronage. They were collectors, patrons of the arts, but their involvement ran deeper than mere appreciation. Their names appeared repeatedly in connection with shell corporations, offshore accounts, and discreet acquisitions. These weren't just buyers of artifacts, they were gatekeepers. A recurring phrase began to surface in Finch's notes, underlined and annotated with frantic scribbles: the legacy. It wasn't a collection, nor a singular object. It was an ideology, a historical narrative meticulously crafted and upheld. Finch's notes hinted at its purpose: the control and manipulation of genuine artifacts, not for profit alone, but to reinforce a specific, distorted version of history. This wasn't about selling fakes, it was about ensuring certain truths remained buried. Finch had been documenting their reach, their methods, their vast network. He had chronicled their systematic suppression of any evidence that challenged their carefully constructed historical edifice. My fingers paused mid-keystroke. This wasn't a simple case of a historian exposing a fraud. This was a direct assault on established power, on the very narratives that define their world. And now, I was holding the key to unraveling it. The true danger of Finch's work, and now mine, had just begun to reveal itself. No nameplate, just a discreet, illuminated number above a heavy, obsidian door. The air inside hummed with the low thrum of servers and an unnerving quiet, broken only by the rhythmic whisper of high-capacity shredders somewhere in the background devouring secrets by the ton. A receptionist, whose expression was as blank as the walls, gestured towards a door down a long, carpeted corridor. The retired curator is expecting you. I walked, my boots sinking slightly into the thick pile towards the designated room. The scent of old paper and ozone clung to the air. The room itself was Spartan. A polished table, 2 chairs, and a single, unadorned window looking out onto more concrete. Sitting at the table was a man whose age was etched into the deep lines around his eyes, but whose gaze remained sharp, almost wary. His hands, gnarled with time, rested on the table, clutching a slim, leather-bound notebook. This was the retired curator, Dr. Seth, he said, his voice raspy, a dry rustle of autumn leaves. He didn't offer a handshake. I've heard much about your particular talents. And yours, I replied, taking the seat opposite him. I need to understand what Dr. Finch was pursuing. What he found. The curator sighed, a deep, shuddering exhalation that seemed to carry the weight of years. Finch was always too close to the sun, too bright, too honest for this particular field. He tapped his notebook. He came to me with fragments, whispers, things I'd heard in hushed tones decades ago, dismissed as conspiracy theories. He mentioned the keepers. I pressed, watching his face for a reaction. They are real, Seth. More real than any government, any corporation. Archaeological finds, he explained, his gaze piercing. Sites, artifacts, texts, anything that could challenge established historical paradigms. They acquire, they bury, they sometimes destroy, all to maintain a specific version of the past, one that serves their political and financial interests in the present. And Dr. Finch found something that threatened that version? The curator nodded slowly. A site, remote, previously unknown. He was convinced it held evidence that would rewrite entire chapters of our understanding of ancient civilizations. A unique geological signature, he called it. Unique geological signature. The words echoed in my mind, resonating with the trace elements I'd isolated from the dust on Dr. Finch's boots, the minuscule particles embedded in the floorboards of the study, even the faint residue on his clothing. The anachronistic details, the mineral dust that had baffled me. What was this unique signature? I asked, my voice tight with anticipation. He hesitated, glancing around the sterile room as if expecting unseen ears. A specific silicate, interwoven with trace amounts of an unusual boron isotope. An estate, really, one that has been under the same family's control for generations. He produced a folded, yellowed map from his notebook, pushing it across the table. It was hand-drawn, detailing an isolated stretch of rugged terrain. My finger traced the contours, landing on a small, shaded area. The Blackwood estate, he murmured, pointing to his sprawling property marked on the map. It's been an enigma for centuries, rumored to hold secrets, but impenetrable. Doctor, the anachronistic mineral dust, the precise composition I had painstakingly identified, matched the curator's description perfectly. This wasn't just a random estate. It was the estate, the Blackwood estate, the source of the dust, the location of Dr. Finch's true discovery, the heart of this conspiracy. Dr. Finch was there, I stated, the words leaving leaving my mouth like a pronouncement. That's where he found what he did. He wouldn't have told me the exact location, not directly. He knew the danger, but he described the geological anomaly, the unique mineral. He was trying to give me a breadcrumb should anything happen. Something did happen, I confirmed, the grim reality settling in. Finch hadn't just stumbled into something. He had been actively investigating, had located the very heart of their operation. The fall hadn't been an accident. It was a calculated silencing. The scale of it pressed down on me, heavy and suffocating. A society so powerful it could manipulate history, erase inconvenient truths, and eliminate those who threatened their carefully constructed narrative. And I, Seth, had just walked directly into their crosshairs. The Blackwood estate wasn't just a location. It was the next step, the crucible where the truth or my demise awaited. The shredders continued their relentless work in the distance, a constant reminder of how easily inconvenient facts could be made to disappear. It was a nondescript building, tucked away on a side street known more for its quiet financial dealings than its dramatic revelations. I wasn't here for dramatic revelations, not yet. I was here for confirmation, for the missing link between a historian's death and a grander scheme. The security was surprisingly lax for a place handling sensitive data, or perhaps it was designed to look that way, lulling targets into a false sense of confidence. I slipped past the reception area during a shift change, a blur against the muted gray walls. The layout was a maze of cubicles and closed doors, each humming with the low thrum of computers. My target was a specific records room, identified in Finch's fragmented notes. Inside, the air was stale, smelling of ozone and old paper. Row upon row of metal filing cabinets stood like sentinels, and a bank of industrial shred bins glowered in a corner, waiting to devour secrets. The file wasn't thick, but its contents were heavy. Within, I found not just ledgers detailing vast sums of money transferred, but also blueprint schematics for a hidden wing, an extension to an existing structure. The details were sparse but telling. Specialized ventilation, reinforced walls, climate control systems far beyond what a typical office or even a private residence would require. And crucially, a remote estate address linking it unequivocally to Elias Thorne. The implications hit me with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't just about stolen artifacts. It was about their production, their replication. I photographed the relevant pages with my phone, the click barely audible in the quiet room. The urge to dig deeper, to pull out every shred of evidence was strong, but time was a luxury I couldn't afford. I extracted only what was vital, tucking the phone back into my inner jacket pocket. As I made my way out, a cleaning supervisor rounded the corner, her cart rattling. I pressed myself against a recessed doorway, holding my breath, until her footsteps faded. My heart thumped a slow, steady rhythm against my ribs. I had what I needed. The estate beckoned. The drive to Thorne's private estate was a descent into increasing isolation. The paved roads gave way to gravel, then to a winding dirt track through dense, ancient woodland. The estate itself was a behemoth, a stone fortress rising from the landscape, its Gothic architecture both imposing and beautiful under the bruised twilight sky. High walls crowned with advanced surveillance systems ringed the perimeter, glinting like predators' eyes. This wasn't just a home, it was a stronghold. I parked my rented vehicle several miles away, deep in the woods, covering it with camouflage netting. The hike was long, through thick undergrowth and over uneven terrain, my pack heavy on my shoulders. I moved with the silent grace of someone who had spent years observing and adapting. My senses heightened. The security was formidable, motion sensors, pressure plates, thermal cameras, but I had studied the blueprints, noted the blind spots, the subtle flaws in Thorne's elaborate defense. He had invested heavily, but no system was infallible. I bypassed the outer fence using a modified grappling hook, scaling the high wall where a cluster of trees provided cover. The interior grounds were meticulously maintained, manicured lawns stretching towards the main house. I kept to the shadows, moving from bush to bush, a ghost in the periphery. My target was the hidden wing, the one detailed in the blueprints. It was seamlessly integrated into the estate's older architecture, a modern addition cloaked in antique stone. A service entrance, less heavily monitored, was my entry point. A quick bypass of the electronic lock, and I was in. The air inside was different, sterile and cool, carrying faint chemical odors. I found myself in a long, brightly lit corridor, leading deeper into the hidden wing. The sounds of ventilation fans hummed steadily. The first door I opened led into what could only be described as a state-of-the-art forgery workshop. The sheer scale of it stole my breath. Workbenches stretched across the expansive room, cluttered with specialized tools, micro-engravers, patented chemicals, ancient pigments, even a small, high-precision laser. Half-finished artifacts lay scattered, A pottery shard painstakingly aged, a bronze figurine awaiting its simulated corrosion. The attention to detail, the technical prowess, was staggering. These weren't crude fakes, they were masterpieces of deception, crafted to fool even the most discerning eye. This was the heart of the illicit trade, the source of the anachronistic details that had initially perplexed me at Finch's scene. I documented everything, my camera clicking quietly, the flash muted. Each image was a piece of the puzzle, confirming the depth of Thorne's depravity. But the blueprints hinted at more. It was hidden behind a cleverly disguised section of the wall, camouflaged as a set of built-in display shelves for antique books. A subtle pressure plate, a specific sequence of movements on the shelf, and a section of the wall slid inward with a hydraulic hiss, revealing a heavy steel door. My hands trembled slightly as I worked the complex digital lock, a combination of numbers and biometric scans. Finch's notes had provided the key, a sequence of seemingly random digits that, in context, made perfect sense. The vault doors swung open, revealing a breathtaking sight. Not forgeries, but genuine, priceless artifacts, each resting on its own cushioned pedestal within climate-controlled display cases. Moonlight filtered through a small, reinforced window high above, glinting off gold and polished stone. A Minoan fresco fragment, its colors still vibrant after millennia. A complete set of Roman medical instruments, their bronze gleaming. Egyptian scarabs, each carved with intricate hieroglyphs. These were treasures ripped from archaeological sites, smuggled across borders, their legitimate histories erased, their existence known only to a select few. The weight of centuries of human endeavor, of cultural heritage, pressed down on me. Thorne wasn't just faking history, he was stealing it, erasing it, hoarding it. My camera flashed, capturing the undeniable proof. The sheer audacity of it, the scale of the theft, was almost incomprehensible. I was so engrossed, so overwhelmed by the implications, that I almost missed the subtle shift in the ambient hum of the building. A faint, high-pitched whine, a soft click from the ceiling. Then, the lights in the vault flickered, turning from a warm glow to an urgent, pulsating red. An alarm, silent but unmistakable, began to strobe. I heard the distant thud of heavy boots, the low bark of a command. Thorne's advanced security systems had detected my presence. I had mere seconds. I slammed the vault door shut, the hydraulics groaning, and sprinted back through the workshop. The door to the corridor was now ajar, and I could hear voices, closer now, echoing down the hall. My heart hammered, a frantic drum against my ribs. I didn't have time to relock the service entrance. I burst out into the night, the alarm blaring across the estate, spotlights sweeping the grounds. A drone, its rotors whining, rose from a hidden hangar, its infrared camera locking onto my heat signature. I bolted, weaving through the manicured hedges, scrambling over a low stone wall, adrenaline surging through me. The drone swooped, its searchlight blinding. I was exposed, a target in a hostile landscape. My escape had to be as swift and silent as my entry. But now, the element of surprise was gone. Now, however, the conference room on the third floor, ostensibly for client consultations, had become my temporary war room. I worked under the harsh glare of a single, unshaded fluorescent light, its hum a constant, grating companion to my racing thoughts. The polished mahogany table was buried beneath a controlled chaos of evidence bags, printouts, and my own meticulous notes. Finch's cryptic files, retrieved from a hidden compartment in her apartment just hours before, lay splayed open, their digital contents projected onto a portable screen I'd rigged to the wall. The screen pulsed with images of ancient texts, detailed schematics, and fragmented ledgers that now, through my lens, began to coalesce into a chilling narrative. My fingers, stained with ink and the faint residue of old paper, danced across the keyboard of my laptop. I was cross-referencing everything. The unique crystalline structure of the soil found on the deceased historian's boots against the geological surveys Finch had meticulously compiled. The anachronistic metal shavings from the estate's hidden chamber against the alloy compositions detailed in the schematics of some forgotten, pre-Roman mechanism. Each data point was a thread, and I was weaving a tapestry of undeniable truth. The first crucial link solidified when I matched a particular type of pollen, barely visible to the naked eye, retrieved from the deceased's clothing with a botanical sample identified in Finch's notes as endemic to a specific, remote valley in Eastern Europe, a valley highlighted in red on one of her digital maps marked with the ancient symbol I'd seen etched into the base of a recovered artifact at the estate. That valley, Finch's research indicated, was the rumored site of the Keeper's primary sanctum, a place dedicated to the preservation of a dark, forgotten legacy. Then there was the photographic evidence from the estate. I zoomed in on the grainy images captured by my endoscopic camera within the hidden chamber. There, faint but distinct, were tool marks on the stone plinth that mirrored the unique striations left by a specialized chiselite found amongst the deceased's personal effects. A chisel whose provenance Finch had traced back to an archaeological dig site in the very same Eastern European valley. It was the same tool used to carve the anachronistic symbols, the keeper's sigil, into the chamber's walls. The deceased historian, Dr. Thorne, wasn't just a victim. He was an active participant. He had been working in that hidden chamber, likely manipulating the ancient mechanisms or preparing new artifacts for illicit trade. Finch hadn't just stumbled upon a conspiracy. She'd been closing in on its very heart, and Thorne was a key figure. I pulled up the autopsy report on Finch, a document I'd fought tooth and nail to access. Her injuries, initially attributed to a random mugging, now screamed a different story. The specific blunt force trauma pattern, the presence of trace fibers that didn't match her own clothing or the supposed mugging location, and the precise timing of her demise, all dovetailed with the deceased's movements recorded in the digital logs Finch had managed to encrypt and hide. The logs showed Thorne had made an unscheduled, frantic trip back to the city, coinciding exactly with Finch's murder. He had been eliminating a threat. It wasn't merely about collecting artifacts. It was about controlling a narrative, a historical truth, through a network of powerful individuals who funded and facilitated the black market trade. It was a hub for financial transactions, for laundering the proceeds of this illicit trade, and for burying any evidence that might connect the keepers to their ancient, forbidden secrets. The very shred bins I'd hoped to find evidence in were likely emptied after Finch's discovery. My gaze drifted to the locked safe in the corner of the room, a hulking steel behemoth that seemed to mock my efforts. Finch's files hinted at its contents, a master ledger, but I lacked the means to open it. Yet, even without that final piece, I had enough. My forensic case was complete, robust, and devastatingly clear. A tremor ran through me, not of fear, but of righteous fury. I had connected Thorne directly to Finch's murder, and both to the overarching Keeper's network. The implications were staggering. I was no longer just a forensic anthropologist. I was a witness, a threat. The same people who had orchestrated these deaths would come for me. I glanced at the door, then the window, a knot forming in my stomach. The police force I knew was compromised. The initial investigation into Thorne's death had been too clean, too quickly dismissed as an accident. Presenting this unassailable case to them would be a gamble, a roll of the dice with my life on the line. But I had to. Finch deserved it. The truth demanded it. I began to meticulously organize my findings into a concise, irrefutable presentation, a digital fortress of facts. Each slide, each piece of evidence was a brick in the wall I was building against a powerful, hidden enemy. Every detail had to be perfect, every link explicit. This wasn't just about justice, it was about survival. The target on my back, once theoretical, was now painted in bold, unmistakable strokes. I was ready, or, at least, I had to be. The kind of place that thrived on discretion, a perfect veil for something far more sinister. I surveyed the building from across the street, a lukewarm coffee cup warming my hands against the morning chill. The gray concrete facade offered no discernible entry points save for the main glass door, and I knew better than to just walk in. My call to the lead investigator had been met with the cautious promise of backup, but I couldn't wait. The sense of urgency that had been a low thrum since Finch's initial findings now vibrated through my bones. I needed to see what was inside. A delivery truck rumbled to a stop, its driver struggling with a stack of boxes near a side service entrance. An opportunity. As the driver wrestled with the lock, I moved, a shadow against the brickwork. I slipped in behind him, a quick, almost imperceptible movement before the heavy door swung shut. The air inside was cool, recycled, smelling faintly of paper and stale coffee. I navigated a labyrinth of identical cubicles, each desk neat, impersonal. The drone of printers and quiet keyboard clicks filled the space. My objective, the shred bins and locked safes. A quick glance revealed a bank of industrial-grade shredders humming softly in a back room, their hungry mouths gaping. More interesting was the security panel beside a heady, reinforced door marked records archival. This wasn't just about financial transactions. This was about history, about what Thorne was trying to bury or exploit. My mind raced, connecting the dots. Finch's anachronistic findings, the soil samples, the peculiar residue, the Keeper's symbol. This office was the nexus. I used a borrowed access card, a small favor from a former contact, to bypass the initial lock. My gaze landed on a specific safe, slightly newer, with a digital keypad. This felt right. Finch had mentioned a code, a sequence he'd seen scribbled in a margin of one of Thorne's obscure texts. Something about a date. I tried the year of the estate's original construction, then Thorne's birth year, then the date of a significant historical discovery Thorne had published. Nothing. My frustration mounted, a hot prickle behind my eyes. Then it clicked. Not a historical date, but a forensic one. The date of Finch's initial findings, the day he'd first alerted me to the peculiarities at the estate. The safe door released with a soft hiss, swinging open to reveal not stacks of cash, but a collection of leather-bound ledgers and a series of digital drives. My breath hitched. This was it. I pulled out a ledger, its pages filled with meticulous entries, dates, coordinates, names, and coded references to artifacts and patrons. One name jumped out at me, repeated with alarming frequency: Thorn. The entries detailed the acquisition and movement of priceless antiquities, many of which matched descriptions of items I knew were missing from historical inventories or worse, believed to be destroyed. But it wasn't just the artifacts. There were references to specific soil compositions, unusual biological samples, and even details that mirrored the unique, anachronistic pollen grains I'd found on Finch's clothing. The keepers weren't just trading artifacts. They were trading secrets embedded within them, perhaps even manipulating history itself. Estate. Preserve. The date next to it was the day Finch had died. My stomach tightened. Thorn hadn't just arranged a fall. He'd orchestrated a meticulous cover-up, leveraging his access and influence to make it appear an accident. The truth, now laid bare, burned in my hands. I copied everything onto a small drive I carried, my hands working with practiced speed. The hard drives in the safe contain encrypted communication logs, blueprints for hidden chambers beneath the estate, and an alarming number of photographs of unearthed relics, some still encrusted with the very soil I'd analyzed. The scale of the operation was staggering, a web woven across continents, all orchestrated from this quiet office funded by unseen hands. I called the lead investigator again, my voice tight with a mixture of triumph and urgency. I have everything. Thorn is behind Finch's death, and he's running the keepers. I have the ledger, the logs, the proof. I relayed the immediate threat, the likelihood that Thorn would be moving to secure or destroy more evidence. I'm heading to the estate now. He'll be there, trying to cover his tracks. Leaving the law office, I moved with a renewed sense of purpose. The gray sky seemed to press down, mirroring the weight of the evidence I now carried. The estate, once a place of quiet historical contemplation, now loomed in my mind as a fortress of deceit, a stage for a final, dangerous confrontation. I drove fast, the hum of the tires on the asphalt counterpoint to the racing thoughts in my head. My plan was simple, if reckless. Confront Thorn with the undeniable truth, expose his operation before he could vanish or destroy more evidence. The lead investigator and his team would be en route, but I knew Thorn. He was a creature of meticulous planning, but also of impulsive preservation. He wouldn't just sit and wait. As I approached the estate, the familiar iron gates seemed to mock me. I bypassed the main entrance, pulling my vehicle into a dense copse of trees some distance away. My eyes scanned for any sign of movement, any indication that I had been anticipated. I knew its layout intimately from my initial investigation. My target, Thorn's private study, the room where Finch had often worked, the room I suspected held more secrets. I found an unsecured service entrance, a small door at the back often used by groundskeepers. Inside, the silence was profound, broken only by the creak of old floorboards beneath my feet. I moved through dimly lit corridors, my senses on high alert. The air grew heavy, thick with the smell of old paper and something metallic, like stale blood. I reached Thorn's study. The door was ajar, a sliver of light escaping into the hall. I pushed it open slowly. Thorn stood by his massive mahogany desk, his back to me, a flickering oil lamp illuminating his profile. On the desk, several antique artifacts lay scattered, some familiar from my initial survey, others I now recognized from the ledgers as recently acquired. There was no surprise, only a predatory glint. "Seth," he said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "I expected you." He held a heavy, intricately carved ceremonial dagger, its blade glinting ominously in the lamplight. "You always were too tenacious for your own good. It's over." "Thorn," I stated, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. I held up the small digital drive. "I have it all. Your ledgers, your communications, the truth about Finch. You murdered him to protect your illicit trade, your keeper's operation." A flicker of something anger, perhaps fear, crossed his face. "Finch was a fool. He stumbled where he shouldn't have. He jeopardized everything." He took a step towards me, the dagger's point aimed at my chest. "And now, so have you." The tension in the room was a palpable thing, thick and suffocating. This wasn't just about artifacts anymore. It was about life and death. The air still hummed with the ghosts of conflict, a metallic tang of adrenaline and spent effort hanging heavy. The immediate danger had passed, but the tension, a phantom limb, still throbbed. I watched as the uniformed officers secured the estate, their flashlights cutting through the pre-dawn gloom, illuminating the scattered debris of a broken facade. The historian's body, once the silent focal point of my investigation, had been moved, its absence a stark reminder of the cost of truth. My hands, still trembling faintly, clutched the worn leather of my field bag. The weight of the anachronistic details, the minute clues that had unraveled this intricate web felt heavier than ever. It wasn't just about bones or pottery shards anymore. It was about lives, past and present, tangled in a conspiracy that stretched through centuries. The subsequent days blurred into a relentless procession of interviews, evidence collection, and the slow, grinding machinery of justice. The detective, a man whose weary eyes now held a glint of grudging respect, kept me close, understanding the unique vantage point my expertise offered. Our focus shifted from the estate to the intricate financial network that had sustained Thorne's illicit trade. The breakthrough came not from a dramatic raid, but from a quiet, persistent tracking of digital breadcrumbs. The wind whipped at my coat as I stepped inside. The stark modernity, a jarring contrast to the ancient secrets we sought to unearth. The place reeked of calculated discretion, of secrets meticulously compartmentalized. Inside, the operation was already underway. A team of financial investigators, their faces grim and focused, sifted through digital files and physical documents. I watched as one of them, a sharp-eyed woman with a severe ponytail, prized open a locked safe built into the wall. The click echoed in the hushed room, a tiny sound with immense implications. Inside, nestled amongst stacks of shell company ledgers and false deeds, were antique parchments, their ink faded but legible, detailing a lineage stretching back to the late Roman Empire. Beside them, intricately carved wooden boxes, no larger than a fist, held miniature scrolls. These weren't just financial records, they were the historical backbone of the keepers. I saw names, dates, and coded references to the legacy and the great work. The true extent of Thorne's empire, a sprawling network that had co-opted academics, collectors, and even minor political figures across continents, was laid bare. Another investigator, a man with a perpetually furrowed brow, wrestled with a jammed shred bin. When he finally cleared it, he pulled out a partially shredded document. "Looks like they were trying to dispose of everything," he grunted, holding up a fragment. It was a partial manifest, listing items I recognized from my initial examination of the historian's collection, the very artifacts whose provenance had first piqued my suspicion. The anachronisms weren't mistakes. They were deliberate and intentional misdirection to conceal the true origins and the dark legacy they represented. The documents, painstakingly reassembled and cross-referenced, painted a chilling picture. The keepers weren't merely artifact smugglers. They were a clandestine society dedicated to preserving a revisionist history, manipulating archaeological finds, and, when necessary, silencing those who threatened to expose their version of the past. The historian, my victim, had stumbled too close to the truth, his meticulous research threatening to unravel centuries of carefully constructed lies. His death wasn't a tragic accident. It was an execution, a final desperate act to protect a fading, sinister legacy. Standing amidst the methodical chaos of the office, a profound weariness settled over me. The intellectual satisfaction of solving the puzzle was immense, but it was overshadowed by the grim reality of what it had cost. The historian, a life extinguished for the sake of a fabricated past. The pursuit of truth, I realized, was rarely a clean affair. It left scars not just on the evidence, but on the investigator. In the weeks that followed, the news broke like a tidal wave. Thorne, captured attempting to flee the country, faced a litany of charges. The recovered artifacts, some of them of unimaginable historical significance, were meticulously catalogued, their true stories finally ready to be told. My reports, once dismissed as speculative, now formed the cornerstone of the prosecution. The quiet satisfaction I felt was tempered by a deeper, more unsettling realization. The world of forensic investigation, once a purely academic pursuit for me, had revealed a dangerous, morally ambiguous underbelly. I stood by my laboratory window, watching the rain streak down the glass, a cup of lukewarm coffee clutched in my hand. The quiet hum of the ventilation system was the only sound. The resolution of the case brought no true peace, only a new kind of vigilance. I had glimpsed the true power of forensic science, not just to understand the past, but to shape the future, to dismantle the carefully constructed lies of those who sought to control narratives. My phone vibrated. An email from a former colleague, mentioning a complex, unusual case involving ancient remains found in a remote, politically sensitive region. I paused, my finger hovering over the delete button. The thought of stepping back into that dangerous arena, of embracing a role that went beyond the sterile confines of a university lab, was both daunting and strangely compelling. The pursuit of justice, I now understood, was a relentless, often perilous journey, and I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I was ready to take the next step,